Ambassador Zethkari of the Valerian Collective had encountered over 47 different species during his 3 centuries of diplomatic service. He had negotiated with the militant Krillians, studied alongside the scholarly Rothians, and even shared meals with the enigmatic Void Whisperers. Each species had followed predictable patterns. Warriors sought conquest, scholars pursued knowledge, traders chased profit. The galaxy operated on established rules, ancient protocols, and comfortable certainties. But nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for humanity. The first contact protocols had proceeded exactly as expected. The humans had responded to their initial transmission with appropriate caution, established basic communication parameters, and agreed to a formal meeting aboard the neutral station Kepler 442b. Their delegation had arrived punctually, dressed in simple but functional attire, carrying basic recording equipment and translation devices. Captain James Morrison, the human representative, appeared entirely unremarkable. Medium height, brown hair showing traces of gray, wearing what humans called a uniform that looked practically mundane compared to the ceremonial robes Zethkari wore. The man's biometric readings suggested he was middle-aged for his species, in good health, and displaying normal stress indicators for a first-contact situation. Ambassador Zethkari, Morrison had said, extending his hand in the curious human gesture of greeting. It's an honor to meet you. We've been dreaming of this moment for generations. The preliminary discussions had gone smoothly. Zethkari had delivered the standard first-contact presentation, outlining the structure of galactic civilization, the benefits of joining the collective, and the protection they could offer to emerging species. The humans listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, and seemed genuinely interested in trade opportunities and cultural exchange. Their technology was primitive but functional. They had barely mastered interstellar travel, still relying on crude fusion drives instead of the elegant quantum tunneling engines that every civilized species employed. Their ships were built like fortresses rather than the sleek vessels of advanced civilizations, using redundant systems and heavy armor that suggested a species accustomed to things going wrong. Their computers were digital rather than quantum, their weapons kinetic rather than energy-based, their medicine chemical rather than genetic. We're probably centuries behind you technologically, Morrison had admitted with that peculiar human expression they called a smile. But we're eager to learn and contribute however we can. Zethkari had nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of response he expected from a newly contacted species. Humble acknowledgement of their limitations, respect for superior civilizations, and gratitude for the opportunity to join the galactic community. Then Morrison had said something that would haunt Zethkari for years to come. We appreciate your offer of protection, Ambassador, we really do. But we've been protecting ourselves just fine for millennia. See, we learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about fair fights. The words themselves weren't threatening. Morrison's tone remained friendly, almost conversational. But something in his eyes had changed. A hardness that hadn't been there before, like steel wrapped in silk. Tell me, Ambassador, Morrison continued, leaning forward slightly, what do you do when your enemy is stronger than you? Zethkari had given the standard response that had served galactic civilization for millennia. We negotiate. We find common ground. We seek peaceful resolution through established diplomatic channels. If that fails, we appeal to higher authorities for mediation. Morrison's smile had widened, but somehow it had become less reassuring. We adapt. The single word hung in the air like a blade. There was something in the way Morrison said it that made Zethkari's 3 hearts skip synchronized beats. It wasn't just confidence, it was certainty. The kind of certainty that came from having faced impossible odds and somehow survived. Adapt how? Zethkari had asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. However we need to, Morrison replied. We find a way. We always find a way. The meeting had concluded cordially enough. Treaties were signed, trade agreements were established, and cultural exchange programs were initiated. But that night, alone in his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel, Zethkari found himself staring at the stars through his viewport, Morrison's words echoing in his mind. He had encountered species that were stronger than humanity, smarter than humanity, more technologically advanced than humanity. But he had never encountered a species that spoke about adaptation the way Morrison had, not as a gradual evolutionary process, but as a conscious choice. A weapon. That night, Zethkari sent an encrypted message to the collective's High Council. The subject line read, Priority Alpha, Potential Threat Assessment, Species, Human. In his report, he wrote, Initial assessment suggests species is primitive but stable. However, recommend extended observation period. Something about their fundamental worldview appears to diverge from established galactic norms in ways that may warrant further investigation. But even he didn't understand yet what humanity's true weapon was. None of them did. The weapon wasn't their technology or their military or their numbers. It was something far more dangerous than any of those things. It was something that would ultimately shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible. 3 months after first contact, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. At first, the incidents seemed isolated, curious anomalies in the otherwise predictable flow of galactic civilization. But as the weeks passed, a disturbing pattern emerged. Humans weren't just participating in galactic society. They were systematically breaking it. On Kepler 186f, human traders had revolutionized the entire agricultural export industry. For over 2 millennia, the Zeltharian farming communes had followed the same time-tested methods passed down through generations. Their crop yields were stable, their profits predictable, their methods approved by the Galactic Agriculture Commission. Then a human named David Rodriguez arrived with a single shuttlecraft and a collection of what he called Earth seeds. Your soil is amazing, he told the Zeltharian farm coordinator Vexthani. But you're only using about 30% of its potential. Within 6 weeks, Rodriguez had introduced crop rotation techniques that the Zeltharians had never considered, developed hybrid strains that shouldn't have been possible, and implemented what he called companion planting that violated every established principle of xenobotany. The result was a 340% increase in crop yields and the complete destabilization of agricultural markets across 3 sectors. How did you know our soil would respond this way? Vexthani asked, staring at fields that were producing more food than his people had ever imagined possible. Rodriguez had shrugged, that peculiar human gesture that seemed to accompany all their impossible achievements. I didn't. But soil is soil and plants are plants. The principles are universal, even if the applications are different. On the mining world of Tau Ceti Prime, human engineer Maria Santos had solved a problem that had plagued the hegemony for centuries. The planet's core contained vast deposits of rare trilithium, but the extreme pressure and temperature made extraction impossible. 47 different species had attempted to develop the technology needed to reach the deposits. All had failed. Santos studied the problem for exactly 11 days before proposing a solution that was simultaneously brilliant and insane. Instead of trying to build machines that could survive the planet's core, she suggested they bring the core to the surface. You want to trigger controlled seismic events, said Chief Engineer Kethvox, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. You want to essentially crack the planet open. Not crack it open, Santos corrected. Massage it, like squeezing toothpaste from a tube. The technique worked. Within 3 months, Tau Ceti Prime was producing more trilithium than the rest of the galaxy combined. The economic implications were staggering, but the philosophical implications were worse. Santos had solved the problem by refusing to accept that it was a problem at all. But it was Dr. Elena Vasquez who truly shattered the foundations of galactic understanding. The Rothian plague had been the nightmare of the galaxy for over 3 centuries. It was a viral infection that attacked the nervous system of over 200 different species, causing gradual paralysis and eventual death. The virus was impossibly complex, constantly mutating, and seemed to adapt to every treatment developed against it. The greatest medical minds in the galaxy had studied it for generations, and their unanimous conclusion was that it was incurable. Dr. Vasquez, a human xenobiologist who had been in the galaxy for exactly 43 days, cured it in 6 weeks. How did you do it? Asked Dr. Yithmorin, the Rothian Republic's chief medical officer. staring at the test results that showed a 99.7% recovery rate among infected patients. We've tried everything. Antivirals, genetic therapy, surgical intervention, even quantum manipulation of the virus's molecular structure. Nothing worked. Elena shrugged, already reviewing data for her next project. You were thinking about it wrong. You kept trying to fight the virus directly, but it's too adaptable. It learns from every attack and develops countermeasures. Exactly, Yithmorin said. That's why it's incurable. It's too intelligent, too flexible. So we didn't fight it, Elena continued. We tricked it. Tricked it? It's a virus, not a person. Intelligence is intelligence, Elena replied. Whether it's biological or artificial, it follows patterns. The virus was adapting to our attacks, so we gave it fake attacks to adapt to. While it was busy developing immunity to threats that didn't exist, we hit it with something completely different. Yithmorin felt his world shifting beneath him. But the theoretical models all said that approach was impossible. The virus's adaptation matrix would compensate for any deception within. Theoretical models are just starting points, Elena interrupted. When reality disagrees with theory, we change the theory. The silence that followed was deafening. In Rothian culture, as in most galactic civilizations, established scientific principles were sacred. They were laws of the universe, discovered through millennia of careful research and validated by countless experiments. You didn't just change them. You humans? Yithmorin said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't respect the natural order, do you? Elena looked genuinely confused. Why would we? If the natural order was perfect, we'd still be living in caves, dying of diseases that we didn't understand, and accepting that some things were just impossible. She paused, studying his expression. The natural order isn't sacred. It's just the starting point. Everything else is up to us. That evening, Yithmorin added his own report to the growing file on humanity. His conclusion was simple but terrifying. They don't accept limitations. Any limitations. They treat every established truth as a temporary inconvenience and every impossibility as a challenge to overcome. He stared at the words on his screen for a long time before adding one final line. I am beginning to understand why Ambassador Zethkari was concerned. The Krillian Defense Force was the undisputed military power of the galaxy. Their tactical doctrine had been refined over 8 centuries of warfare, studied in military academies across 1,000 worlds, and never successfully challenged. Their battle formations were geometrically perfect, their weapon systems were state-of-the-art, and their soldiers were genetically enhanced for optimal combat performance. When the Krillians went to war, victory was not just expected, it was mathematically guaranteed. The Bloodfang pirate fleet had been terrorizing the Outer Rim for 6 months, but they were nothing more than a nuisance. 47 outdated vessels crewed by criminals and outcasts, using salvaged weapons and improvised tactics. Their ships were held together with welding patches and stubborn determination. Their crews were undisciplined rabble, and their leader was a disgraced former merchant captain named Vextar, who had turned to piracy after losing his license for creative interpretations of cargo manifests. When the pirates attacked a Krillian supply convoy in the Kepler 442 system, it should have been a massacre. Admiral Kethvar himself commanded the escort fleet, 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and over 200 fighters. The convoy was protected by overlapping energy shields, point defense systems, and enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. The pirates didn't stand a chance. Except they had a human advisor. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had been traveling with the pirate fleet as part of a cultural exchange program, studying alternative economic systems in the Outer Rim. She was a small woman with short red hair and the kind of smile that made people underestimate her. Her official title was military anthropologist, but her real expertise was in what humans called asymmetric warfare. When the Krillian fleet appeared on sensors, Captain Vextar's crew began preparing for a fighting retreat. Standard pirate doctrine when facing overwhelming odds was simple. Hit fast, grab what you could, and run before the enemy could respond. It had worked for centuries. Permission to make a suggestion, Captain? Sarah asked politely, studying the tactical display with the same intensity most people reserved for fine art. Vextar's mandibles clicked nervously. Commander Mitchell, with respect, we're facing the finest military force in the galaxy. This isn't a time for human experimentation. Actually, Sarah said, it's the perfect time. See, your defensive formation is textbook perfect. Admiral Kethvar is positioning his fleet exactly according to Krillian Tactical Doctrine, Chapter 7, Section 12. His cruisers are maintaining optimal firing positions, his destroyers are screening the flanks, and his fighters are prepared for standard intercept patterns. That's why we need to run, Vextar insisted. They know exactly what they're doing. Sarah's smile widened. Which is exactly why it won't work. They know the textbook. They've memorized every page, studied every diagram, and perfected every technique. They're fighting the war they've trained for their entire lives. She turned to the bridge crew, her voice taking on a tone that made hardened pirates pay attention. So let's write a new chapter. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, though most of the conclusions would be classified to prevent them from being used against galactic civilization. Sarah didn't try to improve the pirates' tactics. She abandoned tactics entirely. Instead of engaging the Krillian fleet in conventional battle, she turned the pirates into something the Krillians had never encountered, a swarm of unpredictable chaos. Scatter formation, she ordered. All ships, different vectors. Don't try to coordinate. Coordination is predictable. Fight like 47 separate fleets, each with its own plan. Admiral Kethvar watched in confusion as the pirate fleet dissolved into apparent disorder. Half the ships charged directly at his cruisers, a quarter started retreating toward the asteroid belt, and the rest began what appeared to be random acceleration patterns. They're panicking, his tactical officer reported. Their formation has completely collapsed. Maintain standard intercept pattern, Kethvar ordered. Target the largest vessels first. That was his first mistake. The pirates weren't panicking, they were adapting. Sarah had given each ship captain a simple instruction: fight like a human. When the Krillians focused their fire on the largest vessels, the smaller ships used the distraction to close distance. When the Krillians adjusted to target the closest threats, the retreating ships doubled back and attacked from behind. They're using our own debris field against us, the tactical officer reported, his voice rising in disbelief. They're hiding their signatures in the wreckage of their own ships. Impossible, Kethvar replied. Standard tactical doctrine clearly states. Sir, they're not following standard tactical doctrine. They're not following any doctrine at all. Sarah had turned the pirates into something the Krillians couldn't understand. An enemy that fought without rules. They used their smaller ships to create artificial asteroid fields, then ambushed pursuing vessels from impossible angles. They fired on their own ships to create convincing decoy explosions, then struck from directions the Krillians weren't watching. They fought like humans, dirty, unpredictable, and absolutely without honor. When the engagement ended 3 hours later, the pirate fleet had captured 2 Krillian heavy cruisers, disabled 4 destroyers, and forced the rest of the fleet to retreat. The Krillians had suffered their first military defeat in over 2 centuries. How? Admiral Kethvar demanded when he reviewed the battle recordings. How did they know exactly what we would do? His aide, a young officer named Teshkari, looked up from his analysis. Sir, I don't think they did know. I think they prepared for everything we might do. The admiral's scaled brow furrowed. That's impossible. There are infinite possibilities in combat. No one can prepare for everything. Not for humans, sir, Teshkari said quietly. According to their tactical files, they have a saying, if you can't prepare for everything, prepare for anything. Kethvar stared at the tactical display, watching the replay of his impossible defeat. What does that even mean? I think, Teshkari said, it means they don't fight the battle they're given. They fight the battle they choose. That night, Kethvar added his own report to the growing file on humanity. His conclusion was simple but chilling. They don't just break the rules of warfare. They refuse to acknowledge that rules exist. The Galactic Council chamber had stood for over 10,000 years, its crystalline walls bearing witness to the rise and fall of empires, the birth of new civilizations, and the careful maintenance of galactic order. The chamber's acoustics were designed to promote harmony and consensus, its seating arrangements calculated to minimize conflict, and its very architecture embodied the principles that had governed galactic civilization since time immemorial: stability, predictability, and respect for established order. Today, that order was under siege. The emergency session had been called after the seventh impossible event in as many weeks. The assembled delegates, representatives of 47 major civilizations and over 300 minor powers, had gathered to address what was rapidly becoming the greatest crisis in galactic history. Not a war, not a plague, not a natural disaster, but something far more dangerous: uncertainty. "The situation is unprecedented," declared Councillor Threxani of the hegemony, his forearms gesticulating wildly as he addressed the chamber. "In 6 months, humans have destabilized agricultural markets across 3 sectors, revolutionized mining operations that had been stable for millennia, cured diseases we had accepted as incurable, and somehow defeated the most advanced military force in the galaxy using obsolete equipment and what can only be described as organized chaos." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The delegates had all read the reports, seen the impossible results, and struggled to comprehend how a species that had barely achieved interstellar flight could be causing such upheaval. "They're not following the rules," complained Councillor Nethvar of the collective, his crystalline body shifting through agitated color patterns. "There are established protocols for everything: scientific research, economic development, military engagement, technological advancement. These protocols have been refined over millions of years, tested across thousands of civilizations, and proven to maintain stability and order. And the humans ignore them completely," added Councillor Yithkora of the symposium. "They don't just break the rules, they act as if the rules don't exist. They approach every situation as if they're the first beings in the galaxy to encounter it." The debate continued for hours, growing more heated with each testimony. Representatives shared stories of human innovations that had turned their carefully ordered societies upside down. Trade routes that had remained stable for centuries were being disrupted by human efficiency improvements. Scientific theories that had been accepted for millennia were being challenged by human researchers who apparently didn't understand that some questions had already been answered. "They solved the Vorthan mining problem in 11 days, reported Councillor Kethmani of the Industrial Coalition. 11 days. We've been working on that problem for 4 centuries. They didn't even read our research papers. They just looked at the situation and decided to try something different." "Different is an understatement," Councillor Zekstani interjected. "They wanted to crack open a planet like it was some kind of fruit. The engineering principles alone should have made it impossible, but somehow they made it work." "That's exactly the problem," Councillor Nethvar said. "They keep doing things that should be impossible. They don't seem to understand that some things can't be done." Some called for immediate action against humanity. Others argued for careful study. A few suggested that humanity might be useful as allies, though their voices were quickly shouted down by those who had experienced human improvements firsthand. But it was the Council's oldest member, Ancient Vorthamar of the First Concordat, who finally spoke the truth that had been growing in all their minds but none had dared to voice. Vorthamar had lived for over 50,000 years. He had seen the rise of galactic civilization, witnessed the establishment of the fundamental principles that governed their society, and watched as countless species found their place in the natural order. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of eons. "You're all missing the point," the ancient being said, his words cutting through the debate like a blade through silk. The chamber fell into absolute silence. When Vorthamar spoke, the galaxy listened. "This isn't about rules or protocols or even their primitive technology," he continued, his ancient eyes seeming to look through time itself. "This is about something far more dangerous than any weapon, any army, or any force we have ever encountered." The silence stretched on, heavy with anticipation and dread. "Every species in this galaxy has evolved to find their place in the natural order," Vorthamar explained, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. We discover our strengths and we build upon them. We encounter our limitations and we accept them. We learn what is possible and what is impossible, and we make our peace with both. This is the foundation of civilization itself, the understanding that the universe has laws, and those laws are immutable. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembly. But humans have never learned to accept impossible. They treat every limitation as a temporary inconvenience. They see every rule as a suggestion that might be ignored if it becomes inconvenient. They view every established truth as simply the current state of understanding, subject to change without notice. Another pause, longer this time. Do you understand what that means? His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet every being in the chamber heard every word. They don't just refuse to accept defeat, they refuse to accept the concept of defeat itself. They don't just challenge our assumptions, they challenge the very idea that any assumption should be permanent. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several delegates actually recoiled in their seats. What do we do? Counselor Threxani finally whispered, his forearms trembling. Vorthamar's ancient eyes seemed to look through them all, seeing possibilities that stretched across time and space. When he spoke again, his words would be remembered as the moment galactic civilization first understood the true nature of the threat it faced. We pray, he said simply, that they never decide we're standing in their way. The Void Hunters had been the galaxy's nightmare for over a millennium. They emerged from the darkness between stars like living shadows, consuming entire civilizations and vanishing without a trace. No weapon could stop them. No shield could block them. No strategy could defeat them. They were the monsters that haunted the dreams of every spacefaring species, the ultimate predators that had turned dozens of thriving worlds into lifeless husks. Their ships were biological horrors that defied conventional understanding, vast, writhing creatures that fed on energy itself. Plasma cannons only made them stronger. Fusion reactors became their feeding troughs. Even the mighty Krillian particle beams were absorbed and converted into raw power that fueled their endless hunger. They had evolved over millions of years to be the perfect counter to technological civilization, turning every advanced weapon into a dinner invitation. When the Void Hunter fleet materialized at the edge of the Sol system, 47 massive bioships emerging from hyperspace like cancerous growths, every alien embassy in Earth's solar system began immediate evacuation procedures. The message was clear and unanimous. Run. Admiral Stone, Ambassador Zethkari said, his three hearts racing as he addressed the human fleet commander via emergency communication. You must evacuate immediately. The Void Hunters are beyond stopping. Every species that has encountered them has learned the same terrible lesson. The only rational response is to flee and hope they don't follow. Admiral Rebecca Stone, a weathered woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many battles, studied the tactical displays showing the approaching biofleet. Her flagship, the UNS Defiance, was a product of human military engineering, armored, redundant, and built to take punishment. Around her, Earth's defense fleet maintained formation. 68 ships of various classes, from nimble frigates to massive dreadnoughts, all bristling with weapons that the aliens considered primitive. How many civilizations have they destroyed? Stone asked, her voice calm despite the magnitude of the threat bearing down on them. Over 300 confirmed, Zethkari replied. The hegemony lost 47 worlds before they learned to retreat. The collective abandoned an entire sector rather than face them. Even the mighty Krillians avoid systems where Void Hunters have been detected. Stone nodded thoughtfully, then turned to her science officer. Commander Park, what do we know about their capabilities? Lieutenant Commander David Park, a young man whose specialty was xenobiology, pulled up the compiled data. They consume energy, Admiral. All forms of it. Kinetic energy, thermal energy, electromagnetic radiation. They absorb our weapons fire and use it to grow stronger. They feed on our power systems and turn our own technology against us. They're essentially living energy converters. And how do they reproduce? Stone asked. Unknown, Admiral. They appear to be immortal. Some of the bioships we're tracking are estimated to be over 10,000 years old. Stone studied the data for another moment, then did something that would have been unthinkable to any other species in the galaxy. She smiled. Commander Park, they've evolved to consume advanced technology and turn it against us, correct? Yes, Admiral. They're perfectly adapted to fight a technologically advanced galactic civilization. Good thing we're not fighting them with advanced technology. The silence on the bridge was deafening. Even Zethkari, listening in from his evacuation ship, felt his 3 hearts stop beating. Admiral, Park said slowly, I don't understand. Stone's smile widened as she turned to address her fleet. All ships, Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha. Strip all power systems except life support and chemical thrusters. Weapons free on kinetic systems only. Prepare for manual targeting. Admiral, her tactical officer protested. That will leave us defenseless. Our shields will be down. Our weapons will be offline. Our weapons will be rocks, Stone interrupted. Our propulsion will be chemical rockets. Our targeting will be done by human eyeballs and human mathematics. We're going to fight the most advanced predators in the galaxy the same way our ancestors fought mammoths. What followed was the most primitive space battle in galactic history. Human ships, stripped of their power systems and running on emergency batteries, maneuvered using chemical thrusters that belonged in a museum. Railguns fired tungsten rods using magnetic coils powered by hand-crank generators. Missiles with chemical warheads guided by mechanical targeting systems streaked toward bioships that had never encountered anything so beautifully obsolete. The Void Hunters, evolved to consume energy and turn advanced technology against its users, had no idea how to fight an enemy that threw rocks. Their bioships tried to absorb the kinetic energy of the tungsten rods, but simple momentum was different from plasma or fusion energy. The rods punched through their hulls like bullets through paper. Chemical explosives detonated in ways their energy absorption systems couldn't process. Admiral Stone watched as her ships engaged the biofleet in close combat. Human pilots in pressure suits fighting in decompressed vessels, using manual controls and iron sights to target enemies that had terrorized the galaxy for a millennium. Boarding parties away, she ordered, and watched as her Marines launched themselves through space using nothing more than magnetic boots and handheld thrusters, carrying weapons that any civilized species would have considered ancient. Powder-fired projectile weapons, chemical explosives, and sharpened steel. When the battle ended 6 hours later, the Void Hunter's primary hive ship was drifting dead in space, its hull pierced by thousands of tungsten rods fired from glorified catapults. The secondary ships had been destroyed by human pilots who had ejected from their craft and manually detonated nuclear warheads, guiding them to their targets using nothing more than trajectory calculations done on handheld computers. How? Zethkari asked, staring at the impossible victory displayed on his screens. How did you know to fight them like that? Admiral Stone was already planning the cleanup operations, coordinating with ships that were slowly restoring their power systems now that the threat had passed. Because that's what humans do, Ambassador. When the game is rigged against us, we don't play by the rules. We change the game entirely. She paused, looking out at the debris field that had once been the galaxy's greatest nightmare. They evolved to fight advanced civilizations. So we stopped being advanced. They were prepared for energy weapons and quantum shields. They weren't prepared for humans with sharp sticks and bad attitudes. Zethkari felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of reality. You won by becoming more primitive? We won, Stone said simply, by refusing to fight the battle they were prepared for. That's the thing about humans, Ambassador. We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win. The news of humanity's victory over the Void Hunters spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by quantum communication networks, diplomatic channels, and the whispered conversations of beings who had witnessed the impossible. What had been hushed fears among the galactic elite became open terror in the halls of power. The impossible had not just become routine, it had become weaponized. Within 48 hours of the battle, emergency sessions were convened on 17 different worlds. Stock markets crashed as investors tried to comprehend the economic implications of a species that could apparently rewrite the fundamental rules of warfare. Military academies canceled classes as instructors struggled to understand how the most primitive tactics in galactic history had defeated the most advanced predators ever encountered. But it was Dr. Marcus Webb, a human psychologist who had been studying interspecies relations, who was finally called before the Galactic Council to explain what everyone feared to ask. What exactly were they dealing with? The council chamber had been modified for the session. Additional security measures were in place, and several representatives attended via holographic projection rather than risk being in the same room as a human. Dr. Webb, a middle-aged man with graying hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of dealing with disturbed patients, stood at the center of the chamber like a specimen under examination. Dr. Webb, Counselor Threxany began, his forearms trembling slightly. Your species has been active in our galaxy for 6 months. In that time, you have destabilized markets, revolutionized industries, defeated our finest military forces, and somehow overcome a threat that has terrorized civilized space for over a millennium. The Council requires an explanation. You keep calling us unpredictable, Webb said, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. But we're not unpredictable at all. We're just operating on a different fundamental assumption than you are. What assumption? Counselor Nethvar asked, his crystalline form shifting through nervous color patterns. Webb paused, considering his words carefully. When he spoke again, his statement would fundamentally alter galactic civilization's understanding of itself. That there's always a way. The simple statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Several delegates actually recoiled as if the words themselves were physically dangerous. Every species in this galaxy has evolved to accept certain fundamental truths, Webb continued, walking slowly around the chamber's center, his casual movement making the heavily armed guards nervous. That some things are impossible, that some enemies are too strong, that some problems have no solution, that the universe has fixed rules, and those rules cannot be broken. He gestured toward the holographic displays showing humanity's recent achievements, cured diseases, revolutionized industries, impossible victories. You've built your entire civilization on these assumptions. Your governments are structured around the belief that certain things cannot be changed. Your economies are based on the principle that certain resources are finite and certain processes are optimal. Your militaries train for conflicts within established parameters because you believe those parameters are immutable. Because they are immutable, protested Counselor Yithkora. The laws of physics don't change based on wishful thinking. Mathematical principles aren't subject to revision because someone finds them inconvenient. Webb smiled, that peculiar human expression that so many aliens had learned to fear. You're absolutely right. The laws of physics don't change. But our understanding of those laws does. And more importantly, our application of those laws is limited only by our imagination. He turned to face ancient Vorthamar, the only being in the chamber whose age allowed him to remember when the current galactic order was established. Ancient One, when your species first achieved spaceflight, I imagine there were those who said faster-than-light travel was impossible. Of course, Vorthamar replied. It violated known physics. But you achieved it anyway. We discovered new physics. We learned that our understanding was incomplete. Exactly, Webb said. You learned that impossible often just means not yet understood. But then something happened. You found your place in the galactic community. You established your niche, perfected your role, and stopped questioning the fundamental assumptions of your civilization. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. But humans evolved differently, Webb continued. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Ice ages, supervolcanoes, plagues, predators, climate shifts that would have exterminated any sensible species. Our entire evolutionary history is one long story of facing extinction-level events and refusing to accept them. That's not unique, Counselor Zexthani protested. Many species have faced extinction events. Yes, but they faced them and adapted to specific niches. They found their place in the ecosystem and perfected it. Humans faced extinction and decided that the entire concept was unacceptable. We didn't find our niche, we decided to make the entire planet our niche. We didn't adapt to our environment, we adapted our environment to us. Webb paused, letting his words settle over the assembly like a shroud. Do you understand what that means? It means that when you tell us something is impossible, we don't hear a statement of fact. We hear a challenge. When you tell us we can't do something, we don't hear a limitation. We hear a problem that hasn't been solved yet. When you tell us we're defeated, we don't hear an ending. We hear the opening move in a new game. Ancient Vorthamar leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on the human. And what game is that, Dr. Webb? Webb's smile widened, and for the first time, the assembled delegates understood why every species that had encountered humans felt a deep, primal fear when they saw that expression. The only game humans know how to play, he replied. The game of refusing to lose. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Finally, Counselor Threxani managed to whisper, "What do you want from us?" "Want?" Webb looked genuinely surprised. "We don't want anything from you. We want to work with you, learn from you, share our discoveries with you. We want to be part of this amazing galactic community you've built." "And if we refuse?" Webb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something that made every security guard in the chamber check their weapons. "Then we'll build our own community," he said simply. "And we'll keep doing what humans do best, finding ways to make the impossible possible." 6 months after the Void Hunter incident, humanity had been quietly moved to a new classification in the Galactic Registry. The decision was made in a closed session attended only by the highest-ranking officials from each major civilization, their deliberations sealed under the most restrictive security protocols in galactic history. The meeting lasted 17 hours, and when it ended, 3 delegates required medical attention for stress-induced breakdown. They were no longer listed as a developing species, or minor power, or even potential threat. They had been given a classification that had never been used before, one that required the creation of entirely new bureaucratic procedures and security measures. Existential variable. The classification came with a single, terrifying note. Probability of following established patterns. 0%. Ability to permanently alter galactic paradigms. Unknown upper limit. But the real truth about humanity lay buried much deeper, in the classified archives that existed in a quantum-encrypted vault beneath the council chamber. The archive was accessible only to the council's most senior members, required biometric confirmation from at least 7 different species, and was protected by security measures that made military installations look like playgrounds. The file was designated Absolute Black and contained a single question and answer that had kept galactic leaders awake for months. What is the one thing aliens fear more than anything? The realization that humans don't know when to give up. But there was more. Much more. Pages upon pages of analysis, psychological profiles, and strategic assessments that painted a picture so terrifying that several council members had requested memory modification rather than live with the knowledge. Ancient Vorthamar had written the final assessment himself, his 50,000-year-old mind struggling to comprehend the implications of what they had encountered. His analysis began with a simple statement that would fundamentally alter how every species in the galaxy viewed their place in the universe. For 1 billion years, this galaxy has operated on the principle of balance. Every species finds its place. Every civilization reaches its limits. Every power accepts its boundaries. The natural order is maintained because everyone understands that some things are impossible, some challenges are insurmountable, and some defeats are final. This understanding is not just philosophical, it is the foundation of everything we have built. Our governments exist because we accept that perfect justice is impossible. Our economies function because we accept that resources are finite. Our militaries train for specific scenarios because we accept that some enemies cannot be defeated. Our entire civilization is constructed around the concept of limitations. But humans have never learned this lesson. They treat impossible as a starting point, not an ending. They see every limitation as temporary, every rule as negotiable, every defeat as merely the first round in a longer contest. They don't fear the impossible, they are energized by it. The analysis continued for dozens of pages, each section more disturbing than the last. Psychological profiles revealed a species that genuinely could not comprehend permanent failure. Strategic assessments showed a pattern of behavior that suggested humans would never stop trying to overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it appeared. Economic projections indicated that human improvements would destabilize every major market within a decade. But it was the final section that had caused the mental breakdowns among the council members. Vorthamar had titled it simply, Implications. We fear them because they represent chaos. Not the random chaos of destruction, but the purposeful chaos of transformation. They don't just refuse to accept defeat. They refuse to accept the permanence of anything. In their presence, nothing is certain. Nothing is forever. Nothing is impossible. Every conversation with a human begins with the implicit assumption that whatever we are discussing can be changed, improved, or completely reimagined. They don't ask, how do we work within these limitations? They ask, how do we eliminate these limitations? They don't wonder, what can we accomplish with these resources? They wonder, how do we create better resources? But the true terror lies not in what they do, but in what they prove. Their very existence suggests that every limit we have accepted, every impossibility we have embraced, every defeat we have acknowledged as final, all of it might be wrong. For 50,000 years, I have believed in the natural order. I have accepted that some things cannot be changed, that some problems have no solutions, that some enemies cannot be defeated. These beliefs have shaped not just my civilization, but my fundamental understanding of reality itself. If humans are right, if nothing is truly impossible, if every limitation is merely a puzzle waiting to be solved, if every defeat is simply a temporary setback, then everything we have built, everything we have accepted, everything we have believed about the nature of existence itself, might be wrong. And if we're wrong about what's impossible, then we're wrong about everything.